Hey there, and welcome on back. As always, I'm Carl with Targets of Attitude, as my professor of knives and all things sharp. Sit on back, grab some pens and paper. It's Monday, which means it's knife basics, which we really need to do. Today, we're looking at a question proposed by one of my subscribers about what I think is the best steel for swords. That's right, swords. Walid Ali asked me what I thought was the best steel to be used for real swords. Well, okay, Ali, I'll be honest, I'm probably not the best person to ask about this. I mean, yes, I've got some swords. I love swords. But my knowledge of swords is more of a lover of history and military history point of view. Well, I've got a lot of training in the martial arts, and I've got a fair amount of training in fighting with knives. I don't really have any training in swords. You probably should go to someone like Skillagrim for something like this. But you asked me the question. Let's give you the best answer I can. Best steel for swords is kind of, it really depends on what type of sword you're looking at. I mean, okay, the one that he had asked it on was, just a minute. Oh, come on, you, don't do that to me. Was when I had originally showed you this sword. Which, okay, for katana style sword or wakasaki style sword, you generally want a hard edge and a soft spine, which is why you often see the real thing having hormones in it. This is reproduction of a NCO sword, and let's face it, in World War II, NCOs weren't of the noble class. They didn't, in the view of their betters, they didn't need real swords. They just needed a hunk of metal that they could wave around to encourage the troops. So most of the swords handed to the sergeants and a few corporals were actually made in the same factory as their bayonets. But then you get into more of a cavalry sword. This particular one was originally designed and made to be sold to people in the Marine Corps, because people with the Marine Corps, are especially officers, are expected to have a sword to go along with their dress uniforms. But so they make these. They're very nice, very good looking. Looks incredibly sharp in dress uniform. Some of them even have real edges. This one does, which is unusual. But they're not designed to be used. They're designed to look good. In real life, a cavalry sword, well, they developed because officers on horseback, and even enlisted men on horseback, needed a longer sword that they could reach someone on the ground with. And you've got something like a foil. These were not really made for use by soldiers or the military. They were dress swords used by courtiers and the wealthy, but they were originally designed so that they were real swords, that they could be used in duels and the like. And so a rapier like this really needs a fair amount of flexibility. Now this one I bought way back to use as part of a Halloween costume. I picked it up at a garage sale for, I think at the time I paid $4 for it, maybe $5. It's not a bad sword. It's got a nice balance to it. But it's stainless steel, which is why I won't flex it very far. A real rapier really should be able to flex up to 40 or even 60 degrees. Stainless steel, I just don't dare flex it anywhere near that far. But you compare that to, say, a Claymore. Most famous of the Scottish swords, and most time when we think about Claymores, we don't think about the basket-hilted Claymores that were issued to Scottish troops in the 1800s. We think about the huge hand-and-a-half swords seen in Braveheart, which, okay, they were designed to go against full metal armor. So the sword, even like that, you're beating on things with swords. Sometimes other swords to parry and defend yourself. Other times against either armor or, after guns became common, heavy leather coats still gave you very good protection against swords. So you needed something tough that could handle beating on things. But you needed something at least reasonably flexible. Admittedly, you wouldn't want to get the same amount of flexibility out of a Claymore or a broadsword as you would out of the rapier I just showed you. But it still had to be somewhat flexible. It had to be able to give. If it's too rigid and too hard, it's just going to break and shatter. So what type of steel would you use? Well, for broadswords and for like the Japanese swords, folded Damascus or pattern folded steel is probably great, in which case you're looking probably at a high carbon steel. The higher the carbon content, the tougher the blade, but you have to be careful because if it gets too high, then it starts getting a little too brittle. So, yeah, 1095 might be great for survival knives, but for swords, I'd actually prefer to see 1075 or even 1060. The lower carbon still got enough carbon for the strength and hardness, so it will take an edge and keep it reasonably, but it's not got so much carbon in it that it starts to lose its flexibility. But high carbon steels tend to rust easily. So, well, how about stainless steel, you may be saying? Not really. See, what makes stainless steel stainless is in most cases the high level of chromium. And chromium is great for giving you steel that won't rust. It also is great for giving you a steel that's very hard. Problem is, the longer you draw it out, the more rough the grain pattern can be. so that by the time you get a stainless steel sword long enough to actually be a sword, it's actually brittle enough to break. Sort of like this scene. Okay, this is from the old Shop at Home network from ages ago. Some of you may remember that. Not a great quality, but video does leave a lot to be desired. But
16 is the item number on this one. And the nice thing about these practice katanas, oh, that hurt. Oh, that hurt big time.
Okay, that's what you get with stainless steel, especially if it's not made by a top of the line manufacturer. Now, all I can see with that one is ouch. But yeah, so that's why stainless steel, yeah, they were popular in the 70s and 80s. But quite frankly, all a stainless steel sword is good for nowadays is hanging on your wall and looking pretty. Again, dress swords like this one, if I make them out of stainless steel, they're never going to get used. But if you're actually going to use it and you're actually going to beat on it, not a good idea. So what steels would you consider? Well, as I said, this 1060 high carbon is good, though it rusts easily, so it's going to be require more upkeep. It's probably going to be a cheaper sword cost-wise, not necessarily cheaper quality-wise, but definitely cheaper price-wise. On the other hand, 1060 is easy to work and very forgiving in the heat treatment. So it's, if you're looking for the perfect steel to learn to make swords on, 1060s and 1075 are fantastic. It's going to give you a good sword in spite of your learning on it. And so, yeah. But if you're not doing that, what else could you use? Well, tool steel is actually designed to be beat on. I mean, it's designed for high impact. So, yeah, there's a couple different possibilities there. But even when I'm talking tool steel, I'm not thinking of D2 or O1 or anything like these. I'm looking more at items like L6 benite or S7 shock steel. Now, some of you may not have heard of these two steels, but let me pull up something here just to make sure I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. L6 benite was developed in the late 90s. And it's a low alloy steel, so it is more likely to corrode than some of the others, so it does require a reasonable amount of maintenance. But if you heat treat it properly, it's probably one of the toughest steels on the market. You can beat on it all day. It's going to take an edge and it's going to hold it fairly well. It's not an easy steel to work with, though. So if you're trying to learn how to make swords, definitely wouldn't start with L6. The other one I'd consider, as I said, is called S7 shock steel. And I mean, from the very name, you can imagine it's designed to handle the shock of pounding on things and striking things. It was developed mainly for hot work, but they found out that it's great for cold work as well. It just does great. It is very expensive, though. So while it's going to give you a sword that'll stand up to almost anything you can throw at it, you're going to pay a pretty penny for it. And if you're trained to learn to make swords, yeah, no, leave this S7 shock steel alone. It's just heat treating it is a royal pain in the ass, if you'll excuse the expression. So, what else could you consider? Now, truthfully, what I would go with is 5160 spring steel. It is, as the name implies, it's made for spring, so it's got a lot of flexibility, but it bounces back to the original shape very nicely. It's a low chromium steel, so it's got right around, if I remember correctly, between 0.08 and 1% chromium, which is enough to give some nice corrosion resistance, but you're still going to need to show it a little bit of care. And it's not as hard to heat treat as many other steels. So, yeah, especially if you're talking about a rapier or an épée, something that requires a large amount of flexibility, 5160 spring steel is fantastic. If you don't want to do that, another excellent spring steel you might consider is 9260 spring steel. This one is interesting because it contains 2% silicon, which I don't quite understand how, but it actually gives you a steel that's got even more flexibility and more ability to return to true after being flexed than 5160. So which one would I consider personally? That comes down to what sword I'm making. If I'm making a lighter sword, say Cavalry Saber, or something that needs a lot of flexibility like the rapier, I would probably go with 5160 in spring steel. It would give me the best flexibility with a good degree of hardness, so it would take and hold an edge much longer, and it would stand up to pounding much better, and the heat treat wouldn't be that bad. Now, if I was paying someone else to make the sword for me, again, for those types of swords, I'd probably go to 9260 spring steel, because it just gives you that little bit extra, and if the person knows how to heat treat it, it does make a slightly better sword than 5160. I just don't have the ability to do the heat treat right. But if I'm buying from someone who can, that's going to be my choice. If I'm talking about a heavier sword, say a broadsword or the Claymore or even a katana, I'm probably either going to go for a medium to high carbon steel like 1060 or 1065, 1075. Again, if I'm making it because they are very forgiving, they're easily forged, and the heat treat is as straightforward as you can ask. I'm still learning to heat treat tool steel. If I'm looking to get it from someone who's making it for me, then I would probably go for a heavier sword. I'd probably go for one of the tool steels, S7 shock steel, if I could afford it. Of course, a sword made from S7 shock steel is probably going to run you close to $1,000, if not more. And so yeah, no, if I'm going to be spending that much, I'd rather go for a good Damascus blade. But again, I'd have to have someone else make it. I don't yet have the skills to make it myself. And L6 Benite is fantastic as well. But again, I don't have the skills to make it. So, yeah, if I'm making it, 5160 or 1075. If I'm paying to have it made, and I want a real sword that I can actually use, I'd probably go for either a 92 and 60 spring steel or the S7 shock steel. But again, my knowledge is I'm not a trained swordsman. What I know of swords is mainly from a love of history and a love of military history. So, if you want better information, probably should ask Skillagrim or someone like him. He is a trained swordsman. But you asked me, so that's the best answer I can give you. In the meantime, I hope I did answer your question for you. I hope you got a little bit of information out of this and it wasn't too boring. In the meantime, I'll leave you a couple links over here for videos I hope you'd enjoy. You can always hit that target there if you want to subscribe. I hope you do. And we'll put a link to Skillagrim's page down in the comments below because he's got a lot of great information. In the meantime, take care and we'll see you on Friday.